scientist, and this video is on resource allocation in a project. Before we go further to understand about resource allocation, it is necessary to understand what is a resource. A resource is an economic or a protective factor that is required to accomplish an activity or as means to undertake an enterprise and achieve the desired outcome. So the definition is very clear. It has to be an economic or a productive factor that is required to achieve an outcome. In this video, what I've done was I have tried taking certain resources which is essential for any organization and other resources that could be changed depending upon project to project. So if you look at any organization or if you look at any project, the most basic resources that is required are the land, the labor, and the capital. Without these three, no organization can sustain a business. Whereas when we look at the other resources that are required, it's energy. If you look at a refinery, there are studies which have shown that 45% of the operational expenditure incurred by a refinery is because of energy. Another resource required is entrepreneurship. It is not that anyone can just come, start a business and become a success. The leader of that organization or the leader of that project has to have a clear vision. If it's an organization, where does he finds the organization in the next 15 years? Where do he wants to put his organization in the next 25 years? If it's a project, how well I can achieve the project completion with lesser cost, with less time, without compromising the quality. That's the entrepreneurial skills that has been required by a leader. Information. It's another resource. It is not that anyone just could come into a business, start the business, run the business and can create profits. He needs to have data which can be processed where he could take decisions. Expertise, which no one could substitute. Management. You have got land, you have got capital, you have got labor, you have got energy. The leader has got entrepreneurial vision, information is available, the people have got the expertise. But if it's not been managed well enough, unfortunately, then the organization might fall apart. Another resource that is required is time, which waits for none. So now let's look at resources in project management. The first basic resource is budget. Once a person is investing money on a particular project, as a project manager, the first job I'm supposed to do is creating a budget. That is, starting off with how am I gonna allocate the funds that has flown into the project onto various activities. Am I over allocating to a particular aspect, or have I not put sufficient money onto that particular work or not? Once I try to understand each work, I try to allocate funds, automatically I could create a budget which gives me a picture how much money has to be spent on that particular project. The second one is people. The human resource is another important resource in project management. You cannot achieve outcome of a project unless and until there is an efficient team involved. The third one, or the third resource in project management that is required is technology. It is not that I could complete a project with the desired quality without the help of a technology. In project management, to plan, to analyze, or to monitor, or to finance, I actually need to use modern tools and techniques. Another resources are time, space, tools, and equipments. Without these, I'm not sure whether we will be able to achieve the desired objective of the project. Now let's look into what do we mean by the resource allocation. Resource allocation is nothing but assigning the resources in an economic way. So when I say assigning the resource in an economic way. As I said in my previous slide, I cannot allocate all the money to one particular activity of the project. I cannot assign all the people onto a particular activity of the project. I am supposed to allocate in an efficient manner. So that's what we call as resource allocation. When we look at the definition, resource allocation is the scheduling of activities and the resources required by those activities while taking into consideration both the availability of the resource and the project time. So it is nothing but allocation of resources to various activities of a project so as to achieve the desired output or to achieve the predetermined objective of the project. When we talk about resource allocation, there are two different ways or two different mechanisms where the resource allocation plan can be looked into. The first one is what we call as the basic allocation decisions, and the second one is what we call as contingency mechanisms. When we look into the basic allocation decisions, we have a choice which items to be funded in the project or which project has to be funded, where the allocation has to be based into, what level of funding each project should receive, which project should be left unfunded. That means I'm just taking an example of 3 people. How many people has to be kept on a project? Is there a project where we don't have to keep people as of now because there might not be an immediate requirement? It could be the technology. So we need to understand how are we going to allocate resources on a basic level. How much funds to be given, how many people has to be allocated to a project. That's what we call as basic allocation decision. In contingency mechanisms, it's altogether different from the basic allocation. Here, we are creating a priority ranking of items that needs to be excluded from the plan. That means if we get more funds flown into or more resources becomes available, we know that these items has to be funded. Similarly, we do have a priority ranking of items wherein if our resources reduced, say for example, earlier it was told that we are going to invest 20 crore rupee, whereas now it has been said the investment is going to come down 15 crore. So this priority ranking of items will help us to decide which items can be sacrificed or which projects can be sacrificed. That's a contingency mechanism. So when you look at the basic allocation, it is where we basically allocate things, allocate funds, allocate people, allocate technology, etc. Whereas in contingency mechanism, we have kept 2 levels. If we get more resources, what has to be included? Or in this case, if the resources are reduced, what items has to be sacrificed? So our allocation is based on a contingency. It's not based on basic requirements. Now let's look at an example for resource allocation for jobs. Here what I've done was I've taken an example of a private call center. So in a private call center, I could have any process. Let's say for example, I could have the BSNL, I could have the Airtel, and I could have the Jio services. That means my call center representatives can take care of all the 3 calls. So it's not that if I am an executive at a call center, I'm going to take calls for all the 3. There will be a certain percentage of people allocated for Airtel. There would be certain percentage of people allocated for BSNL. There would be certain percentage of people that has been allocated for Jio, because it's a private call center that we are looking at. So I'm going to look into a night shift. Say for example, for Jio consumers, 50% of my call center people are being allocated. Let's take an example. There are 50 computers and 50 people who is taking care of Jio calls. There are 30% of people, that is 30 people and 30 systems, computers, are being kept for Airtel customers. So whenever Airtel customer calls, they are being connected to these 30 people. And 20% of my resources, say for example 20 people and 20 computer systems, are being allocated for BSNL. The example I've used here is depending upon the call rate. Say for example, Jio has got more customers, so more people call for Jio process. Airtel has got again the second most customers, so they have been given 30% of resources allocated. So the allocation is depending upon how many people call at night. Are we able to take all the calls? If yes, we allocate accordingly. So this is an example of a resource allocation. There is another concept. When we study about resource allocation, you also need to understand about resource leveling. Resource leveling is nothing but it's a project management technique used to examine unbalanced use of resources. So I'm going to use the same example here. In this example, we have said that there are 50 executives, people allocated for geo process. There are 30 people allocated for Airtel, and there are 20 people allocated for BSNL. Let's take an example. There are more calls at night for BSNL customer care, whereas less people call at night for Jio customer care. And when I look at these people, these 50 people, each person takes at least, let's say, 50 calls a night. Only 50 calls a night. Whereas the BSNL people, in the sense, the customer care people of BSNL in my company is taking 200 calls per person. So here you can see the resource allocation is not perfect. In this process one, there are only 50 calls per person, whereas in process here of BSNL, that is basically 200 calls per person. That means I need to level the resource. Might be for process one, that's for Geo, the percentage should be 25, whereas for BSNL, the percentage could be 45%. So that's what we call as resource leveling. Understanding what are the unbalanced use of resources. If there is an unbalance, we try to balance it so that over allocation or conflicts can be avoided. Assess the project team members from becoming overwhelmed and from working overtime. Resource over allocation. So over allocation of a resource is when a resource has been assigned more work that can be completed during normal working hours. It often leads to overtime and overspending on financial resources. So as we look into, there has to be a balance between the allocation of resources. So is there a technique that we could avoid resource over allocation? The first one is resource leveling. Prioritize projects. Which project has to be given more importance so that the resource can be allocated for that particular project, and once that project is over, it can be withdrawn and allocated to a second important project. The third one is leaving breathing room. In the sense, let's take an example. I am a resource that's been used in a project. I have been overburdened with work. Over a period of time, my efficiency might be affected. The basic reason is because there is another person in my team who is not that efficient. Because he is not efficient, he is not been allocated much work. So I have been overburdened with work, and over a period of time I get demoralized or demotivated, because of which my efficiency could go down. So leave breathing room for all the resources. If it's human resource, everyone to be given. So I have to have some time between projects and avoid the putting out fires approach to project management. That is, it shouldn't be like if something happens, there's always a contingency to cover. It shouldn't be like that. The project has to go as per the plan. Whatever has been planned, it has to go according to that. It shouldn't be always like putting out the fires approach. And that's all about resource allocation. So if you have any questions, my email address has been given on the first slide. You could ask. Thank you. Thank you very much.